Take a seat in the Nosebleeds section and get comfortable because episode 7 of FTN is here. Whether it be Spotify or Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, or YouTube, I'm Blake Arulian and I'm with my good friend Brick Harris, your host for this week's MMA Indulgence. Whether you're a servant to the scalp or cage side contender, we are glad to have you with us. Special thanks to Robert Jemias, Don't Be a Richard Music, and Sociwear Clothing. Brick, how are you looking so cute today?
Bro, I gotta be honest, big shout out to Sociwear because I wouldn't be this cute without him. If you notice the drip that we got on, Blake's rocking the From the Nosebleeds MMA podcast t-shirt. I'm rocking the all black FTN Laurels. So go check out sociwear.com/FTN podcast. That's SOSIwear.com/FTN podcast to check out the new podcast drip. In the rundown today of FTN episode 7, we will go through rounds 1 through 5, including Jeremy Stephens versus Yair Rodriguez, the crowd reaction, and the interesting dynamic that came from that cultural shock last weekend in Mexico. Round 2, we're going to talk about the greatest moments of the weekend in UFC Fight Night of September 21st, 2019. We're going to be talking about possibly a spinning back fist to win one of the knockouts of the year. Also, we're going to talk about Max Holloway versus Alexander Volkanovski being announced for December 14th of this year as a featherweight championship fight. In round 4, it's Daniel Cormier versus Stipe Miocic 3. Are you here for it? And are we? Stay tuned. And round 5, we are going to talk about Jack Hermansson and Jared Cannonier, which honestly is going to be such an incredible fight. But first, before we dip into all of the rounds, we're going to do something a little different. We like to turn it back sometimes. We like to talk about pound for pound sometimes. Today, we thought we'd bring up a interesting topic that both of us have longed to talk about for a while, and that is the top 5 blank. Now, the blank today will be filled in by rivalries, since we have a lot of things to talk about with Jeremy Stephens and Yair Rodriguez. There's also Daniel Cormier Stipe 3. Anytime there is a trilogy in the works, the word rivalry comes to mind. So we're going to be discussing the top 5 rivalries in our respective opinions.
Sounds good. I'm super excited to do this. I broke this down, and I'm going to start with number 5 for me. Royce Gracie versus Ken Shamrock, the birth of the UFC and the birth of the first great rivalry the UFC has ever seen. They fought at UFC 1. Royce Gracie beat him with a rear naked choke. They fought at UFC 5, the longest UFC fight in the history of the UFC, with 36 minutes, and it turned into a draw. And then in 2016, they fought, but nobody likes to talk about that. Number 4, GSP Matt Hughes. When GSP started in the UFC, he was a great fighter, faced Matt Hughes, who was, a huge name, and that was GSP's first loss. He later on would avenge that loss twice. However, that was the birth of a GOAT. I think that GSP loss really changed his trajectory of who he was going to become, and it really changed his work ethic as well. Number 3, Team Alpha Male versus TJ Dillashaw. There is still to this day no love. There is still to this day a lot of bad blood between them, and still a lot of uncharted territory with Uriah coming back, Cody talking about wanting Henry Cejudo. TJ, once he comes back from that suspension, he's going to 100% be a part of that grouping of guys.
I like that. I like how you said, what did you say, no love?
No love. There's still no
hinting
love.
A little bit to the Cody Garbrandt.
There's still a little bit of Cody no love, yes.
I like it.
But not to mention, let's talk about how crazy this rivalry is. Conor McGregor, in The Ultimate Fighter, when it was Uriah Faber and Conor McGregor, he called out TJ Dillashaw. He said, "You better watch out for that snake in the grass. He's that guy. He's going to stab all you guys in the back." And look what happened just a few months, maybe a year later.
You know on Fortnite or Call of Duty when you're in a battle and then someone who's completely not even involved comes over and starts shooting you? That's called getting third-partied.
Yes.
Team Alpha Male and TJ Dillashaw were third-partied by Conor McGregor, who just came in and stirred the pot. I'm sorry.
And I love it. No, you're great. Number 2, the first great rivalry for all MMA fans, 2 marketable guys, Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, from digging the grave and dragging the body, from best friends to training partners to absolute enemies to one of the nastiest rivalries in the history of the sport. And number 1, Anderson Silva and Chael Sonnen. This was the beginning of mainstream MMA. Chael and Silva hit the control towers of ESPN. Chael was on Jim Rome. He was on Dan Le Batard. Chael made the rivalry game great. He made trash talk great, and he would talk to reporters, deny things that he had openly said, tell them that he didn't say those things, which would have reporters up in a frenzy, trying to fact check themselves and trying to remember exactly what they said. And then if we don't have Chael Sonnen, we don't get Bisping. We don't get Colby. We don't get Ronda. We don't get Conor. Those personalities don't happen without Chael Sonnen and the great rivalry that he created between him and Anderson Silva and the entire country of Brazil.
Wow. I am blown away. I like all of those. Honestly, like, none of those I disagree with. However, entirely, my top 5 is different than yours.
Really?
We don't match up on a single one.
Oh, okay. I can't wait to hear this.
There's one that we're together on, but not nearly the same order, okay? So let me hit you with mine. I honestly, I agree with a lot of that. So much of that was eye-opening. But once again, we came at it with a little bit different intentions or a little bit different viewpoints.
FTN pod.
Where diversity is born. So for my top 5, for the 5th best rivalry in UFC history, I took Tito Ortiz, Ken Shamrock. Because, in my opinion, this was where the WWE-style trash talk, but real fighting, was kind of birthed. After a Tito Ortiz win, you had Ken Shamrock almost jumping the cage as a spectator and getting in Tito Ortiz's face. Like, that's a WWE thing. Nothing came of it. If you remember Daniel Cormier calling out Brock Lesnar and getting shoved halfway across the cage last year when he defeated Stipe Miocic for the first time, it was like that, but for one of the first times ever, right? So Tito Ortiz, Ken Shamrock would go on to fight after, months and even years of pushing things off and fights getting canceled, but it was still one of the greatest rivalries and one of the first in the sport with 2 absolute legends in their own right in the UFC. Now, on to number 4, Chael Sonnen, Anderson Silva. This is, I think, where I was actually hooked on MMA, on the UFC in particular. I remember being on vacation with my family. We were in, I think we were in like St. Thomas or the Bahamas. The only reason I remember that it was out of the country is because we got to go to a bar to watch the fight, and I was probably like 14, so obviously we were not in the States anywhere. So we went to a bar and watched that fight, and I just remember watching over and over the promo of Chael Sonnen just belligerently shaming Anderson Silva for being a coward, a scaredy cat, just something about culturally lying in the mud with his Brazilian friends, just digging so deep culturally and just really stabbing and cutting little wounds into the Brazilian culture as a whole. And not to mention, Anderson Silva, before this, was a quiet guy. He didn't talk trash. Anderson Silva never talked trash. He was one of the most respectable guys in the UFC. But he said in broken English, I don't like Chael. I want to hurt Chael. You had the first cute little naive attempts from Anderson Silva trying to trash talk, and I think that is where the beauty of this rivalry truly comes from, is because you had 2 such different human beings, but the outcome was just poetic with Anderson Silva defeating him twice. On to number 3. This might shock a few. Conor McGregor, Khabib Nurmagomedov.
Oh.
Absolutely love this rivalry. As I told you just a couple minutes ago, I stayed up last night until about 2 a.m. watching the Netflix film Conor McGregor Notorious, where you think, you watch the movie and it shows you that after a year or two, Conor McGregor goes from collecting welfare and food stamps in Ireland to living in possibly one of the most gorgeous mansions I have ever seen in my life. Absolutely unreal of a come up. This kid is the definition of making it in America. Absolutely incredible. And then you have Khabib Nurmagomedov, who is way more quiet, right? Way less about the money, way less about possessions, more just kind of scary. Now, this rivalry started with just the fact that they knew they were going to fight each other, and I think Conor McGregor knew that, Khabib knew that. But once they both became more and more successful and they knew that fight was coming, that's when the tension started to build up. And the pre-fight hype for this fight, Conor McGregor showing up drunk to a press conference and offering Khabib whiskey, was just the absolute pinnacle of this rivalry. Sadly, it did not end. It ended the way that everyone wanted to. Khabib jumped the cage and there was a brawl afterwards. What else can you ask for from a rivalry? However, sadly, I don't think that there will be a Khabib McGregor 2. I'm praying that there is somehow Conor gets back into the swing of things and that happens for him. But for right now, that's one of the best past rivalries in the sport. On to number 2, Uriah Faber and Dominic Cruz.
Love it.
As I am Brick Harris and the WEC is home to me, I could not go without mentioning the WEC and this incredible, incredible rivalry. Uriah Faber is a legend with a decent amount of losses. I believe he has like 12 or 13 losses under his belt. He's been here forever. Dominic Cruz, however, I believe has 1 or 2. I believe he has 2. Yep. One against Cody Garbrandt and then one against Uriah Faber. Now, these two went at it in the WEC when MMA was getting cool, right? Especially for the small weight classes, for flyweight, bantamweight, featherweight, and these guys were studs. I think Uriah Faber is like 5'6". This dude was my hero growing up because I knew how short he was, I knew how strong he was, and how good of a fighter he was. And I grew up watching Dominic Cruz and Uriah Faber go at it, whether it was trash talk, whether it was pre-fight hype, or whether it was actually them fighting. I used to watch them on Versus in my family for family home evening on Monday nights. It was the best time, and this is one of the rivalries that has still just been so marking to me. Now, this shouldn't come as any surprise. What I have as my number 1. It should be. Can I take a guess? Yeah, go ahead.
John Jones, Daniel Cormier.
Absolutely.
Woo! Brick loves John Jones.
Absolutely. You're thinking I'm going to put WEC and John Jones anywhere but the top 5 rivalries of our time? Come on. No, but when you think about it, right, John Jones, Daniel Cormier has accrued some of the most publicity, some of the most shocking interviews, press conferences, hype videos, and the fights in general. I think those 2 fights were 2 of the best light heavyweight fights I've ever seen. These are 2 of the best fights in light heavyweight history. And the rivalry between the 2 stretches well beyond MMA. These guys don't like each other. These are 2 of the greatest of all time. Forget Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, legends in the sport in the past. These are the 2 best of all time to ever do it, and we are blessed to have seen them fight twice and maybe 3 times. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But there you go. Those are our top 5 rivalries of all time. I'm kind of tired. I don't know if you want to keep doing the show, but I've pretty much said everything that I had. No, just kidding. I have a lot more. But what a round it was.
Let's go ahead and jump into round number 1. UFC Fight Night in Mexico this past weekend. Jeremy Stephens versus Yair Rodriguez. A 15-second fight, a no contest due to an eye poke, and Jeremy Stephens was sent to the emergency room immediately after. Brick, what were your thoughts, and what do you think comes next?
Well, if I hadn't seen the fight, and if I was listening to this podcast for the first time and I heard you say the fight lasted 15 seconds, I would have been like, oh my gosh, was Ben Askren there? What happened? Did Jorge Masvidal jump the cage and something happened? However, Jorge Masvidal was there, but it was not as exciting as we thought. An eye poke after just seconds of the fight led to absolute pandemonium. I don't have much to say because obviously there wasn't a fight. There were like 3 or 4 strikes total thrown, not even landed, just thrown. But what I think is the most interesting thing about this is the hype for the fight was not nearly as much as the post-fight tension, if that makes sense, right? You got Jeremy Stephens, who's a guy, he's violent, he's exciting, he's excited. So everything with Jeremy Stephens is business, and everything with Jeremy Stephens is going to be intense. But there wasn't necessarily any bad blood between these 2 guys before. Like there was, I want to fight him, great, we're going to fight. So there's the natural tension that comes from fighting someone in the UFC. But there wasn't any necessarily real, genuine bad blood between the 2. However, when Herb Dean gave the signal that the fight was over, my gosh, it was scary. I had never seen anything like that. Corona bottles thrown into the cage. You have a play-by-play announcer ducking under a desk for protection. You have guys like Cain Velasquez and Brian Ortega leading a chant in homophobic and very, very racially controversial insults. Like, for a fight being called off, the tension afterwards was way, way more than the buildup. It wasn't a pay-per-view fight. This wasn't for a title, not even close. I don't think either of these guys would have gotten a title shot even if they had beaten the other guy. There's still so much more happening in the featherweight division. But the ramifications of this fight ending in 15 seconds were huge. and there was pushing and shoving in the hotel room afterwards, there has been nothing but hate and threats being thrown from team to team since then. I'm just blown away how the cultural abuse that Jeremy Stephens faced and is still facing does not mirror at all the hype of the pre-fight.
I'm blown away at all of it, and I not nearly on the same stage, because UFC 229 was such a huge card and everyone in the world was watching, and what happened with Khabib jumping the fence and all of those things that happened. But it was very similar to that. I felt the same sort of tension, the same sort of disgust.
Danger almost.
Yes.
You're almost in fear of, is Jeremy Stephens going to get hurt because something is going to get thrown at him? Is someone going to jump the cage?
UFC security, Megan O'Leary tweeted that UFC security had to literally cover him coming through. And I mean, obviously, the amount of things that were being thrown, the amount of things that were hitting Jeremy Stephens, the amount of things that didn't hit Yair Rodriguez, it goes to show that this was not only a dangerous place to be, but not a good place to run a UFC event. And I really was disappointed. And my question is, why does the audience think they have the audacity to do that? And why does Yair Rodriguez have the audacity to cuss out Michael Bisping and call Jeremy Stephens a fake and all these things? And I'm going to be talking about that later in the show during my final thought. But my word to describe my thoughts for this was disgust and regret. I was so sad to see a fight that, like you said, Brick, didn't really matter that much turn into this huge fiasco that never needed to be. I understand you paid your money, you came, and you were excited to see Yair Rodriguez fight Jeremy Stephens, but there were a lot of great fights to watch. And despite the fact that the fight didn't necessarily fully happen, you still have to, at some point, understand the conduct of being at these events. And it was definitely a black mark on the UFC, unfortunately.
I think the saddest part, to go a little bit with what you said, and I won't spoil much of your final take, but I was also a little disappointed and unimpressed with Yair Rodriguez, his conduct afterwards. The exchange between him and Jeremy Stephens in the hotel is fuzzy, and there's no real 100% truthful response or explanation to what happened. So you kind of have to shrug your shoulders and say, I'm sure both of them were a little bit at fault, but at the same time, Yair Rodriguez, this is your home country. This was a much bigger fight for you than it was for Jeremy Stephens. And to, like you said, cuss out Michael Bisping. I understand you're upset, but fighters have had way more difficult. Do you remember when Conor McGregor wasn't able to fight Jose Aldo because Aldo dropped out with a rib injury? Do you remember when Daniel Cormier was told that John Jones wasn't going to be able to fight? Those guys handled it with grace and saying, well, shoot, let's fight someone else, or let's keep it going. Let's keep moving. Yair Rodriguez was in no position to do what he did. He could have handled it with much more grace and looking forward to the future with optimism. Now, as we continue, let's get into round 2. We're going to be talking about the greatest moments of the weekend, UFC Fight Night in Mexico. Obviously was not the main event, but there was some silver lining to be talked about.
I think we got knockout of the year. Steven Peterson with not only a spinning back fist, but a counter spinning back fist to a spinning back fist. That was one of the coolest exchanges I have ever seen, and I am super, super excited. We wanted to announce on the podcast, we will also be posting a video later to our Instagram. We got in contact with Steven Peterson, and we are locked in. We have all the times and dates ready to go. We are going to be talking to Steven Peterson, interviewing him about his MMA journey and what's to come tomorrow, and we'll be posting that on our IGTV as well as our YouTube, so be sure to check that out. That is the knockout artist of the year, if you ask me, Brick.
I would have to agree, and I don't think I'm the only one. Verdict MMA put out another post, and we love using their content, so thank you to them. Verdict MMA put out a post saying 12% predicted that Steve Peterson would win this fight via knockout. 12%. Now, just configure that and think of how many percent predicted he would win by a spinning counter back fist. I'd put it at 0. Probably 0. To put it in perspective to any casual MMA fan who's listening or watching, winning a fight on a counter spinning back fist to a spinning back fist would kind of be like an NFL playoff game being won by an interception at the 1-yard line to almost a pick six and then a fumble at the 1-yard line, and then it's ran back again by the initial offensive team for a touchdown to win the game.
When I was watching it this weekend, I was like, did that just happen? Like, did I just see that actually happen? And I texted you immediately, said, that's knockout of the year. I don't care what anybody says. I'm sorry, Jorge Masvidal, Ben Askren. Maybe I have a soft spot for Ben Askren because I love him so much. But that was cooler. A reverse spinning back fist to that was crazy. So, anyways, I think Steven Peterson is awesome. I'm really excited to talk to him. I know Brick is as well. And we were excited to give you guys that interview and try to talk to as many fighters as we can. I also wanted to give a big shout out to Carla Esparza versus Alexa Grasso. Carla Esparza is a former strawweight champion of the world, and she lost to Joanna Jędrzejczyk, and since then has been kind of clawing her way back to the very stacked strawweight title. Alexa Grasso is a up-and-coming fighter. She was 11-2 coming into this fight, and she put on a very, very good performance. Both fighters were very, very good. It was a split decision win for Carla Esparza. The fans did not like it because Alexa Grasso was the Mexican native on this fight, but Carla Esparza was put in, and hats off to Alexa Grasso, she put Carla Esparza in a nasty, nasty armbar from her guard. And it was deep and it was tight, and her arm was hyperextended. Carla Esparza looked like if it was anybody else in the world, they would have been tapping.
You talk about knockout of the year. That was the escape of the year.
It was.
The escape of the year.
People started joking that she had a bionic arm, that she was doing all these things. And I think it was just her will to win, because this girl, like the commentators were saying on this fight card, she wants to get back to that title, and she knows that she can do it. She had a great road and a great rise, and though she has kind of fallen off a little bit, she has totally the chance to get back and challenge anybody who will be the strawweight champion, whether it be Weili Zhang or any other top prospect right now. Carla Esparza is no joke, and Carla Esparza is one tough cookie.
Round 3, here we come. Max Holloway versus Alexander Volkanovski, a featherweight title matchup set for December 14th in Las Vegas. Was announced just this last week, I believe, and since then, the hype. I don't want to say that I called it, because I didn't, but mentally I did. I saw Alexander Volkanovski being the number one prospect in the division, and I thought, man, that would be a great fight.
So I'm going to start with a question to you. Okay. Why did Max Holloway lose to Dustin Poirier this year in that fight? It was pressure and it was strength. Dustin Poirier outweighed him. He walks around heavier than him. Max Holloway was going up. Max Holloway is defended against Jose Aldo, Brian Ortega, Frankie Edgar, and Anthony Pettis. None of those guys are as strong as Alexander Volkanovski. Volkanovski is the toughest opponent since Dustin, and maybe the toughest opponent Max has ever fought. Volkanovski used to fight at 170 pounds at the beginning of his career. He walks around heavy, and he feels heavy when he hits that top pressure. However, I do want to say, if Max Holloway can get the win, can get the nod against Alexander Volkanovski, he gets to go into a tier of class of fighters that is unprecedented. And those are the GOATs at certain weight classes that are undisputed. John Jones, greatest light heavyweight of all time, without a doubt, no question about it. Anderson Silva, greatest middleweight of all time, no question, no doubt about it. Demetrius Johnson, greatest flyweight of all time, without a question. Stipe Miocic is getting there in that heavyweight topic. If Max Holloway can beat Alexander Volkanovski, which I think is a tougher matchup than he's ever had before, which is all I was trying to say at the beginning of this, he has beaten everyone except for Conor McGregor. But I think that doesn't really have the question is no longer, is it Jose, is it Conor, is it Max? It's very clear that Max is the most accomplished. It's very clear that Max has faced the toughest opponents and defended against the toughest guys, and I think he gets to go into that tier of John Jones, Anderson Silva, Demetrius Johnson, and Stipe Miocic.
The nail was absolutely hit on the head with that one, Blake, because my take on Max Holloway, Alexander Volkanovski, and it is way too early to give a prediction, but I'm going to. Hear me out. Max Holloway, right? One of the most impressive fighters in the past half decade. In the past 5 years, he has won 13 of his last 14 fights. He's never been knocked out. Here's the list of guys that he's beaten, not in the last 5 years, but in his career. Cub Swanson, Andre Fili, Jeremy Stevens, Ricardo Lamas, Anthony Pettis, Jose Aldo twice, Brian Ortega, and Frankie Edgar. That is an elite class of fighters. However, why I'm picking Alexander Volkanovski in this fight, why I think Alexander Volkanovski will be the next person to wear the 145 strap. Who has Max Holloway struggled with in the past? Lightweights. Yes. Lost to Dustin Poirier twice, a lightweight. lost to Conor McGregor, a lightweight. Also lost to Dennis Bermudez, not necessarily a lightweight, but a strong featherweight. The reason Max Holloway has a hard time and has had a hard time in the past is with bigger guys, lightweights who are stronger, who are longer, and who have better wrestling than he does. Conor McGregor has better wrestling than he does. Dustin Poirier has better wrestling than he does, as well as Dennis Bermudez. When you were talking about Alexander Volkanovski and his strength, right? The guy's 20-1, perfect UFC record, never lost in the UFC. This guy is a featherweight version of a Gregor Gillespie. He's a scary wrestler. Not only is he's a Jack Hermanson of 145. He is a wrestler. He is a ground and pound guy. He will beat you up and tell you about it. He is an absolutely dominant force at the featherweight division. He has also beaten legends, Chad Mendes, upset of the division for the year probably, also beating Jose Aldo. Other than that, he's not nearly as tested as Max Holloway is. But he also doesn't have the losses that Max Holloway has. In my opinion, in my humble opinion, Alexander Volkanovski is a lightweight. And he's cutting, and he is doing what Khabib is doing to the lightweights, and that's fighting below his caliber. And I think Alexander Volkanovski is going to do to Max Holloway what he's done to everyone, and that's what Khabib has done. That's wrestle, ground and pound, win fights.
What makes Max so great is his takedown defense. His takedown defense percentage is 84%, one of the top in the featherweight division. And that has saved him a lot of times against a Brian Ortega who decided to stand up and bang because he couldn't take him down. A Dustin Poirier who couldn't actually take him down and they decided to strike instead. Max Holloway, his only chance to really avoid the ground with this guy is to really work on that takedown defense and make sure that because if he gets to the ground, this fight will be nasty. And I completely agree with you. The strength and the ability of Alexander Volkanovski is maybe the thing that everybody is talking about that could defeat Max Holloway, who has been one of the pound for pound greats for years now. And he is absolutely deserving of that. But it'll be very interesting. I think this is the matchup that finally maybe defeats Max Holloway. It kind of reminds me of even Khabib Conor, where it was, this striking king with good takedown defense who never really could lose to anybody. Yeah. You take a really, really good wrestler like Alexander Volkanovski, and you might be in for a long night. It'll be really fun to see. Let's go ahead and jump into round number 4. Daniel Cormier and Stipe Miocic are in the works, and we decided to create a new game called Are You Here For It?
I am. Short answer. I'm here for it. But here's why. I'm here for it because I have to be. Okay? I'm here for it because it is not the fight that we want, but it's the fight that we deserve. Right? Do you understand? Well, of course you do. We were just talking about this before the fight, how hard it is to cut weight. Daniel Cormier, we do not deserve, as fight fans, to ask Daniel Cormier to recut down to 205 and fight Jon Jones in a third fight. Let me just say, Daniel Cormier has given everything to the MMA community. He has become one of the only double champs to ever live. He has fought through adversity like almost no one else has. He has dominated in 2 different divisions, going back and forth, cutting weight, gaining weight, cutting weight. He has had incredibly close matches with the greatest of all time in Jon Jones. He has beaten one of the greatest heavyweights of all time, Stipe Miocic, and then he came back for some more. Now, I don't want Daniel Cormier's last fight to be against Stipe Miocic. I honestly don't want him to fight Stipe again, because I think the same thing is probably going to happen. But as fight fans, we are asking way too much of DC to ask him to come down and fight a Jon Jones who is better, stronger, more consistent, healthier, more honest in his fight preparation and in his physical health. So asking DC to come down and say, hey, fight Jon Jones, why don't you fight Jon Jones? That's the fight that we want, right? Of course. Everyone wants that fight. But this is the one we deserve because you got 2 greats. DC is in his niche in the heavyweight division. Stipe Miocic is a classic heavyweight champion. And so this is the fight that is going to happen, and we deserve it, but only because we don't deserve anything more. We don't require anything more from Daniel Cormier than what he has already done.
I'm going to hit you with the exact inverse to all of this. I am not here for this at all. Because here's the thing. Who's asking for Cormier John Jones anymore? Since Daniel Cormier lost, no, you're the only one. You're the little John Jones fanboy over here. The only person in the world that wants Daniel Cormier John Jones again is Brick Harris and any other person that runs a John Jones fan Instagram account. I do not want to see John Jones, Daniel Cormier. I don't want to see Stipe versus Daniel Cormier. I want to see John Jones and Stipe Miocic at heavyweight. I want to see John Jones step out of his comfort zone, step out of where he's been at home at 205, and actually fight somebody who can actually take him down and actually beat him possibly with the pure brute force of Stipe Miocic, his incredible boxing. Daniel Cormier has nothing else to prove, and I talked about this a couple weeks ago. Daniel Cormier doesn't need to fight anybody. He's one of the greatest of all time. He's one of the greatest light heavyweights of all time. He's one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. There is nothing to prove, and you're absolutely right. If Stipe Miocic and Daniel Cormier fight again, Stipe already found out Daniel's weakness. And as long as he can keep that takedown defense, which he is so good at, Daniel Cormier will not take him down to the ground. And if that happens, Stipe Miocic is going to attack that body. He's going to attack the body as much as he possibly can and break down Daniel Cormier. And it's going to be another sad loss. And then at the end of the day, Daniel Cormier is going to sit there and he's going to ask himself, no, but I still want one more. And he's going to get into this terrible cycle that fighters get in where it says, I just want one more. I just want one more. John Jones versus Stipe Miocic is fresh. It is new. It is what a lot of people actually want to see, and it is something that is actually interesting to the eye. Daniel Cormier's already lost to Stipe Miocic, and he beat him in the first fight, but it really was, the second fight was a lot more convincing, I would say. John Jones and Daniel Cormier have fought twice, and as much as they were great fights, John Jones clearly won both of those fights. It is not a matter of Cormier-Stipe. It's a matter of Stipe versus the next guy. And I think the next guy that deserves it, that fight is either a Francis Ngannou rematch or what I would personally like to see, and I think a lot of people feel that way, is John Jones.
The final round of FTN Episode 7 is finally here. Round 5, Jack Hermansson versus Jared Cannonier. A fight in the middleweight division which could have serious implications in the division as far as championship contention, as far as records go, as far as records are broken. So, Blake, give me your first initial thoughts on this fight.
Okay. Cannonier is a light heavyweight fighting at middleweight. Cannonier has dropped down in his last 2 fights and had 2 TKO wins. He destroyed Anderson Silva's leg. Hermansson has a loss against someone very similar to that. Thiago Santos. He used to fight at 185, moved up to hit more natural weight, which is 205. However, it's kind of the same thing as Cannonier, but it's the reverse, you know what I mean? From 205 down to 185. Cannonier is kind of the same in that situation, and that was one of Hermansson's big losses. I think that for a veteran Hermansson who's seen a lot of fights, spent a lot of time in there, versus a very strong and fresh Cannonier, it might be a toss-up. But the question and like the story for at least for me is how strong is Cannonier and how big of a shot Hermansson can take from Cannonier. Because if Hermansson can take those shots on the chin, it's going to be a long night, and it's going to be a fun night because both fighters are very, very talented and skilled. But I think that the power of Cannonier is going to give him the edge in this fight, and that's why I picked Cannonier.
See, I go with Jack Hermansson because, once again, Verdict MMA, the Instagram page, came in clutch, and they posted saying that 33% predict that Jack Hermansson will submit Jared Cannonier. Now, this is already a pretty big stat. Predicting that someone will submit another fighter 33%, that's a pretty big prediction. It's not necessarily 50-50. It's not a majority prediction, but 33% is a lot. Why this is interesting is because Jared Cannonier has never been submitted in his career, ever. But that just goes to show how much of a submission artist Jack Hermansson is. 2 of his last 5 wins were from a Darce choke. Other than that, ground and pound is the name of the game for Jack Hermansson. I don't think Jared Cannonier is going to be able to handle the offensive wrestling, the offensive pressure of Jack Hermansson, which has been world-renowned for the last few years in the middleweight division. Now, what I think is going to happen, Jack Hermansson does what he does. I think he's going to take down Jared Cannonier multiple times. I think it will either go to the decision, and it will be a unanimous decision for Hermansson, or there will be a stoppage. There will be a submission. I stand by either one of those two. But what's most important is what happens after this. I think the winner of Adesanya Whitaker does not necessarily face a Paulo Costa. I think they will face a winner of Paulo Costa and this fight. I think this fight has decent enough implications in the division that it's important enough to know what's going to happen afterwards.
See, Paulo Costa's performance and just the streak that he's been on makes me believe that it will immediately be a Paulo Costa against the winner. You also have Darren Till, you also have Kelvin Gastelum. Maybe the winner of that goes up against a fighter like this, maybe the winner of Hermanson Cannonier. The only reason I say Cannonier is because his last 2 fights, since he's cut down to middleweight, he's absolutely obliterated both fighters, and it's been knockout wins. But you're right. If it goes to the decision, probably Hermanson wins this fight because he has ability to go to the ground and things like that. It's going to be 2 freight trains colliding into each other again. Not as, marketable as Yoel Romero Paulo Costa, but it's going to be something similar, and it's going to be very, very exciting to see. The winner of this fight doesn't necessarily get a title shot, but he definitely gets a lot closer, and however dynamic and dominating your performance will be, maybe you can jump the gun over a Darren Till or a Kelvin Gastelum or something like that, or a Paulo Costa. After watching the main event this past Saturday, I have a lot of thoughts. Not about who would have won or what could have happened, not even about the fans. This is about judgment of character. This is about standing up for the good guy and exposing a coward. For Yair or anyone else to say that they were robbed, that he was faking it, that he could have continued, let me remind you who Jeremy Stephens is. In his career, Jeremy Stephens has fought 8 world champions, had 44 professional fights. In his career, Jeremy Stephens has shown up. In his glory, in his downfall, in his wins, and in his losses, Jeremy Stephens has always shown up to fight. He will fight anyone, anytime, anywhere, and he fears no one. Let's go back to 2016, following a 13-second knockout of the greatest featherweight of all time and eyeing champ status. Being looked at as one of the greatest fighters to ever grace the canvas, Jeremy Stephens says, "Hey Connor, I'll knock you out." He could not care less about his record of 28-16. He could not care less about being known as a gatekeeper of the featherweight division. Jeremy Stephens is a fighter, and that's what he does. Jeremy Stephens is not only the most honest guy in the room, but he is the toughest guy in the room. This is the same guy who was training in the jungles of Mexico with Tony Ferguson to get ready for this fight for 6 weeks. This is the same guy who goes when everyone else says to stop. This is the last guy who would ever fake an injury. Yair Rodriguez, as much of a tough guy that you think you are, calling out the fake injury, calling Bisping words that I will not say, here's a reality check. You can keep thinking you're the toughest guy Stephens has ever fought. You can keep thinking your speed and cardio is something he can't keep up with. I promise you it is nothing he hasn't seen before. 8 world champions, 44 pro fights, and still hungry like he never won a single one of them. But keep thinking he's trying to dodge you. Stephens will be back to shut you up, to teach you how to fight, to teach you how to win, and to teach you how to lose. Keep poking eyes and blaming others. Keep crying in the octagon and cussing out reporters for something that you did. Stephens will be a professional. Stephens will heal up. Stephens will be hungry because unlike some people in this sport, Jeremy Stephens is real. Jeremy Stephens is simply a fighter.
My filibuster today goes out to all the self-proclaimed BMFs in the game. The 2 who coined the expression, George Masvidal and Nate Diaz. But also the BMFs who don't own that title with Madison Square Garden in November. Without the press conferences and lights outside the Brooklyn Bridge in New York City, I'm talking guys like Donald Cerrone, Gleison Tebow, Anderson Silva, Randy Couture. These are the guys who have the same type of records as George Masvidal, have the same type of records as a Nate Diaz, who have the same type of attitudes as these fighters, which is just keep fighting. These guys have way more wins than they have losses. They have way more losses than they have regrets. But these guys don't need big Madison Square Garden. These guys don't need press conferences. These guys don't need a glorified BMF title belt. Donald Cerrone's training camp is called BMF Ranch. What does he need a belt for? My shout out this week goes out to all the BMFs in the UFC who will not be fighting on November 2nd. No disrespect towards Jorge Masvidal or Nate Diaz. I think that will be one of the best fights in division history. However, I think a little respect is lost towards real legends like Cowboy Cerrone, real legends like Gleison Tebow, real legends like Randy Couture, who are BMFs without ever having fought for a BMF belt.
The beautiful and eloquent Brick Harris. Yes, I just called you beautiful.
Love it.
That is it for episode 7 of From the Nosebleeds MMA podcast. We appreciate everyone listening. Reach out to us online if you are interested in purchasing shirts. Reach out to us online if you have any thoughts. If you want to talk some smack, if you think we are whack, go ahead and hit us up in our DMs, on our comments, on our posts. We try to post every single day. Brick, do you have anything else to say?
All I got to say is slide in those DMs and don't be friendly. I want to see people sliding in those DMs being like, yo, you guys suck. Talk about this. Talk about that. Shout out to my boy Quentin Hall, who after the first episode said, yo, why aren't you showing any love to my boy Tito Ortiz? Well, guess what, Q? Tito's in the show, and so are you. That's FTN Podcast. Don't be Richard. Send us out.